Welcome to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Lori Eltred, licensed clinical social worker and therapist. Welcome to the podcast that's going to talk about social work in very real ways. We're going to talk about the things going well, the pressing issues and needs, and things that we really need to change about social work. I hope you enjoy our conversations, the insights, the thoughts, and even some of the actions we can take to make our profession, our lives, and our worlds better. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome back to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Lori Eldred. And today I am talking with two fabulous social workers from Michigan that I've gotten to know through NASW Michigan and just through some other work I've been doing in the social work profession. So welcome, Jenny Bishop and Holly DeVivo. I will have you guys introduce yourselves and talk about what you're doing, how you got to where you are now. So I think one of you guys can fight over who wants to go first. But
Sure. So I'm Holly DeVivo. I am a licensed clinical social worker, an LMSW clinical in the state of Michigan. My work is predominantly focused on immigration, on immigrants, on conducting clinical assessments for individuals navigating various immigration processes. I also am the co-owner of Elevated Therapeutic Services, along with my dear friend Jenny. As far as like therapeutic modalities and things, I do see some clients on a weekly basis for specializing in chronic pain and illness management. But the majority of my work, I would say, is probably focused on immigrant populations.
And I'm Jenny Bishop. I'm an LMSW clinical in Michigan, as well as many other states, even though Holly didn't name the long list of states she's also licensed in. I'm the co-owner of Elevated Therapeutic Services, and currently I am the second VP, which basically means I'm the finance person for NASW Michigan, as well as I just was appointed by Governor Whitmer to the Board of Social Work for a 3-year term starting in January.
I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, nice. I did not know that. So congratulations that you will be on the board and hopefully advocate. Yeah, hopefully advocate for, I guess. Yeah, talk about what does, actually, I don't know if I'm really 100% sure, what does the Board of Social Work do for the state?
Yeah, so I think one of the primary functions is a lot of disciplinary things, unfortunately. Okay. So making sure people are upholding the quality of care and safety of clients is something I'm really, really passionate about, as well as the board is involved if there's any changing to licensing, such as like if we join the state compact. That would be something that the board would work with the state, and it is a board through LARA. So we work through basically all the licensing things and all the regulatory things.
Nice. Yeah, I get those emails and kind of look at the agenda. I'm always very curious what the work is that they're doing. I've even had a thought of like going to a meeting just to see how that operates. I think it might be a good idea for a lot of social workers to understand how that board operates, since they're the ones that handle complaints if those get filed or disciplinary actions. So yeah, absolutely. Congratulations.
I believe there's still one more open seat. So if anybody is interested, they can reach out, and I would be happy to share with them how to go about being appointed.
Okay, nice. There you go, Holly. You could add that.
You could add that to my list. The doctorate, the evaluations, the pract, all of the things. You know what? Like, if you want to get stuff done, give it to somebody that's already busy. Here you go.
Right. That does seem to be something, because the folks doing all of the things seem to be quite busy. So yeah.
Holly, do you care if I share our fun, cute meet story of how we came to be?
No, go ahead. Yeah. Tell our origin story.
So Holly and I actually met in the senior living world. I was an executive director of an assisted living and memory care community in Kentwood. And Holly at the time was the marketer for a hospice company in Grand Rapids. So she came on my first day of work and brought me a little goodie basket, and we were chit-chatting, and she was like, I'm getting my MSW. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a social worker. If you ever need if you ever need supervision, let me know. I would be happy to do it. And then, we networked and things throughout our time in those worlds. And then when Holly she was considering leaving, and then she reached out and said, hey, are you still willing to do my supervision? And I was like, yes. And so then Holly worked in a group practice for a little bit till she was fully licensed. And then at one point I said to her, I was like, so what do you think about doing this together?
And I said,
in private practice. Then we went through credentialing ourselves. We do all of our own billing. We do all of our own marketing, all of our own SEO, all the things. So yeah, we joined forces.
Nice.
We bonded over sushi and CBT, and we have never looked back.
Right. I feel most of us have these stories where I think about the social work friends that I have. Because I know that I met you, Jenny, through Holly. And then I'm also like, well, how did I meet Holly? And most of the time I'm like, I have these folks and I'm like, how did we meet? They've just been like, they've been there, they've been in my orbit. And then I do it sometimes. I don't know if I always have a cool story that way where I'm like, I just meet you somehow and then I don't let you get away or something. So
A lot of people don't know how they meet me, but they don't forget me. So
yeah. Well, you're a good person to have around. I mean,
I guess.
in many ways, the things you know.
Holly was the best thing that came out of that job.
Yeah.
You know what? Same. Jenny was the best thing that came out of that job as well. Yep.
Yeah. And I think most of us can relate to it too. And you're just like, the job itself sucked, but the folks that I've like gathered along the way have made it nice. I think where a chunk of my like friends are from are just social work jobs that I just keep bugging them and stay in contact, do coffee, hang out type thing. Yeah. Awesome. I know both of Holly, you especially are in the immigration world doing advocacy, the evaluation. I know you guys do also a lot of public speaking and presentations. You did an NASW Michigan series on immigration. Do you guys want to talk about that as well? Your interest in that, kind of what led you to that, and maybe just let's talk about why social workers really should have we don't have to be experts, but have a working understanding on the immigration system and what is happening with ICE and the federal government.
Sure. Should I start, Jenny? Do you want to start? It's a lot of, it's a story.
Mm-hmm.
I have family that have various immigration statuses, and probably about 15 years ago, one of them was unfortunately placed in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings, not having any money, because I believe at that point in that life, I was planning on being a Spanish language professor. And so I was in grad school for my master's in Spanish language and did not have any money whatsoever, could not afford an attorney, and actually represented that person as what's called a reputable individual within EOIR. So EOIR is the Executive Office of Immigration Review. It's also known as immigration court. It's where you go to have your hearings, where a judge determines the merits of those hearings and then the outcomes of various immigration petitions. And so spent several years navigating that process with the help of many local attorneys who offered free 1-hour consultations. And so long story short, this person had benefited from a U visa, which is a humanitarian visa that's intended for victims of violent crimes. And so this person benefited from that visa, was approved for that visa, and then the deportation proceedings were terminated. And then they now are a lawful permanent resident, so they have a green card. And as part of that application, they went through a clinical evaluation, psychological assessment, mental status exam, those kinds of things. And that ended up being a very critical piece of evidence in their application, just demonstrating ongoing harm from that violent crime. And so when I became a social worker, doing those kinds of assessments was something that was very important to me. Learning how to do them, taking proper training, using the skills that I have as a bilingual social worker to be able to provide not just like evidentiary paperwork or forms or things of that nature, but also really being able to provide space to hear people's stories and to hear them in their language. And because many times people don't know, like they've never shared these things before. Mental health is not something that's prioritized in their country of origin or anything that they might have had access to previously. And so they have the opportunity to share their stories. So creating space for that was really important. And then when Jenny and I joined forces, Jenny also got trained in doing these assessments. And, it was really Jenny that kind of spearheaded this idea of like, we need to get this information out there. We need to be sharing this with people in our field. We need to be doing talks and presentations. And We need to be like collaborating and showing social workers how incredibly vital this work is, not just from just a humanitarian standpoint, right? Because back then we didn't know what was going to happen, what we've seen been happening in the past 6 months to a year, right? But also, just from an ethical standpoint, as social workers, we have a code of ethics. Jenny will speak more on this, I'm sure, but like we can't ignore this. We can't. It would be unethical and unprofessional, and it would be just a complete disregard and disrespect to our communities if we were to just turn a blind eye to this intense human suffering.
Yeah, I'm agree 100% with you, Jenny. What are you thinking?
Yeah, especially for me getting started, really, I owe that to Holly. Holly has not so much lived experience. On top of that, Holly was also a licensed interpreter for many, many years, though she didn't toot her own horn on that. So as I was learning so many things and learning more about, the immigration process is complicated, but to understand the depth of how complicated it is and all of the socioeconomic issues that come from the system being so complicated, Holly, it blew my mind. And it was like, more people have to know this. We have to talk about this. People need to know that you can't charge for an interpreter. Yes, it sucks. Don't shoot the messenger, please. But it's not fun that you have to pay for it, but also everyone has a right to language access. Social workers in all the settings that we're in, hospitals, schools, therapy, doctor's offices, people are missing out on vital resources and care from a lack of knowledge of the system. And we want to really assist as much as we can in hopefully changing and eliminating some of these barriers.
Yeah, I remember, Holly, you came and did a presentation for Region 4 in Michigan for NASW on that very topic of access to interpreters for folks. And I remember just having that presentation. I think that's probably how we met, now that it's coming back to me, and just being really amazed that this was, I did not know, right, that you have got to provide this. Because I think what we see sometimes in Facebook groups, or at least what I've seen in local ones, of like, hey, I have a client who speaks this language, I can't help them. Can they get referred on, right? Or, referred to maybe community mental health or something else, because that interpreter, they don't have one, they don't have access to one, they don't want to pay for one. And there aren't a lot of Spanish speaking or native language speaking. I mean, I think we probably will see in our area more Spanish, but so many other languages exist and folks not getting care. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, so eye-opening, especially, I mean, I've been in the field 20 years, so it's like, I feel like I kind of have a grasp of most things, but also that's a huge thing. I don't know that social workers know that, or professionals in general.
And it is it has changed, right? Because of changes in like the current presidential administration, right? There are, it used to be covered under, it is covered under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? It is a civil rights violation to deny someone access to linguistic and culturally competent services. And it was kind of reinforced by Executive Order 13166, which was signed into law by President Clinton in I believe 2001, right before he left office, which really clarified that, hey, if you receive any kind of government benefit, including Medicaid, Medicare payments under the Affordable Care Act now, that has just reiterated this right to language services if you use commercial insurances. And while Executive Order 13166 has been repealed or has been, eliminated, Michigan has statutes on the books that require you to provide interpreters free of charge. You cannot use family members. Let's be real, like using a family member in a therapeutic situation is just wholly inappropriate, because you're asking that person to engage in dual roles, which is not fair to that person. Like if I go for a family member at a doctor's appointment, I don't know what that doctor's going to say. I don't want to tell this person that I love that they have cancer or they're dying or there's no treatment for them, right? That's the doctor's job. That's not my job. So you're doing that. But also, like, HIPAA is a thing. So
Still, I mean, it's a thing right now. Who
yeah,
knows?
okay, fair. It's a thing, right? It's still a thing right now, right? And so do you want someone's 18-year-old son interpreting for, a sexual history exam? Do you want them interpreting for a pelvic exam? Like those kinds of things are not, do you, as social workers, like, do we want to do, if we're in a clinical space, do we want somebody their son to interpret like a sexual assault narrative? Right? Like it's wholly inappropriate to use friends and family members. We need to be using professionals, and we have to pay for them. And that sucks. But it also sucks that we have to, pay for malpractice insurance, or we have to pay for, just different things that are part of our overhead. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, just that real ethical issue you run into when you're having a family member, doing some type of interpretation. I've seen it. I mean, I was lucky in some of the public facing, the work I do in private practice isn't as public facing, but community mental health, CPS, we always had access to an interpreter service and at least some type of line we could get on the phone and kind of help somebody, but also seeing situations where kids are put into really tricky spots. And then you're also right, how accurate is what they're telling you, and so then you're relying a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. I mean, you see that a lot in grocery stores and stuff like that. It's like you're relying on a kiddo for accurate interpretation of a medical issue. I mean, on and on and on, right? Just
Mental
how
health,
scary that.
delusions, hallucinations.
Yeah.
Our license is on the line when we're doing
Yeah.
this kind of work, and we're going to rely on a child. That's just,
Yeah.
it's ludicrous.
Yeah. Who might have some barriers themselves or don't, the technical language and some of the words we use, they might not completely understand what that is, or they're giving us their version of what they think it is. And of course, kids, we all have some interesting thinking and associations of things, right? But also just feeling bad when I saw those situations and the, poor kiddos really just being put in an adult role. And I think that just not being okay. Immigration work. And I'm sure you've seen probably a whole lifetime of changes in a short amount of time as well. So kind of what would be things we really should know as social workers if, we're interacting with folks that have some various documentation or undocumentation level, because most of us as social workers are engaging with folks at different levels somewhere in our work.
Yeah. Jenny, you want to?
Yeah, especially in any clinical space, we really should not be documenting somebody's, if they have an A number, if they have a passport number, if their immigration status. We should be very protective of that, especially with how flimsy privacy is these days. And being just very mindful that anything can and could be used in a negative way that could really honestly destroy somebody's life, and they could return to their home country and suffer serious harm. So every decision you make is very critical in terms of what social workers should know. I think our biggest goals as we do this education and with writing the articles is, one, people do not understand how complex and how long people wait and how expensive this process is. And a lot of people, the narrative that's been passed down to people is that it's a choice. You're just choosing to be undocumented. You're choosing to be underdocumented. That's not the truth. A lot of people are trying to do the process. They're trying to save the money. They're going through exploitative situations. And, potentially, let's say if you don't speak English and you live in Grand Rapids, you might have a harder time getting a higher paying job. So you're already at a lower socioeconomic status and the challenges that come with that. On top of that, and trying to figure out how you're going to pay an immigration attorney $10,000. Most of us don't have 10 grand laying around. So really a lot of empathy and being willing to look at the facts and challenge what we're told and what we think the system looks like, and really looking at the human beings behind it, I think would be my biggest message. And in terms of immigration evaluations, especially like I do immigration assessments as well. Holly definitely does a good chunk more than I do. I'm a little bit more more primary on the therapy side of things, but you need to be prepared for the vicarious trauma and the secondary trauma that you're going to hear. This is heavy, heavy work. And you need to come into this with the space where you can take care of yourself And if you're not confident that you can take care of yourself with hearing these things, you should not do the evaluation. This is people's lives, and it's incredibly critical that you put your best foot forward and you give the best work that you can, no matter what.
How about you, Holly? Things you'd want to add?
No, I think Jenny covered, a great chunk of it. The one thing that I might add is that please don't do any type of evaluation that you are not trained to do. I think that we see a lot of within the social media space, there is this narrative that, oh, well, I want to help immigrants, I want to help the community. Maybe I can make some money doing these things. Both of those things are objectively false. Yes, it's an additional, potential additional cash flow, but no social worker is getting rich, and no social worker is getting rich off of evaluations. The other piece that I would add is that, when you're doing a clinical assessment, it's not advocacy. I know it comes across as advocacy, but it's a legal affidavit. It's a forensic evaluation. One of the changes that I have noticed, and that a lot of the attorneys with whom I've worked are also noticing, is that, DHS, so the Department of Homeland Security attorneys for DHS, are becoming increasingly aggressive in their tactics in trying to discredit anything that might be considered like expert witnesses or any types of evaluations that appear to be any kind of advocacy, right? These are like medical legal affidavits, and you need to be trained in how to do them and how to do them properly. Writing an evaluation and saying like so-and-so has PTSD, they probably do, right? But that doesn't mean that your report is going to be A, beneficial to them, or B, even accepted by immigration or by U.S. Customs and Immigration Services or, immigration court. And, I've seen, I've testified multiple times in EOIR, and I've seen individuals who claim to be expert witnesses who are not even admitted to be an expert witness, to be able to speak, because quite frankly, they don't know what they're doing. They have a good heart and they're trying to do what they believe is right. But advocacy work needs to be done outside of the courtroom if you're not a lawyer. And advocacy work needs to be done, in the streets. It needs to be done boots on the ground. Write a letter of support for your clients. Absolutely. Like, write a letter saying like, I'm treating this person for this. I know that their family is struggling through this because I've been working with them on it. Absolutely write those letters. Do not do assessments that you're not trained to do, that I have a certificate in forensic social work, like so does Jenny. Like this is not something that like, oh, so-and-so is offering this training and I can do a training and pay this money and now I can do them. No, you can't. Like, you really need to be and I might ruffle some feathers here. That's kind of my baseline. I ruffle feathers, but people die. People get deported and people die. People are dying in detention, I think. And so this has to be taken incredibly seriously. And if you I love the desire to help. I love the desire to advocate, but know your role, stay in your lane, and make sure that you are qualified to do the work that you're attempting to do.
Yeah. Speaking of, the risk that people are in, I'll let Holly stop me if she thinks I should stop sharing this in any way. But the last evaluation I did was somebody who actually has been very, very, very likely over medicated since being detained in Baldwin at Great Lakes Detention Center. And he is now nonverbal. He does not really, all of his ADLs out the window. He's lost significant amounts of weight. I mean, he is a shell of how everyone described him before. Really, really sad. So, I did a little bit of a different structured evaluation with him because he was nonverbal and they want to deport him. And what does that look like for him if he's deported? And he's been here since he was 4. He has no family there.
Yeah, and I think that is a heart-wrenching story and a poignant one at the same time of if we're not doing these evaluations well, we're not trained to do them, or writing them in ways that come across as a form of advocacy versus, I've written, there's a difference between writing a biopsychosocial versus writing a formal report to the court. I've done in other forms of work, sex offender assessments. I've done reports to like probation boards for people who have long life sentences, that are trying to advocate to, kind of get themselves paroled. And so it's a very different way of writing, in terms of tone, language, structure. It is very matter of fact, very facts based. And so, and also, right, if you're like, oh, I want to do this to help, and you guys mentioned that in some of the articles, that white saviorism that shows up so much in social work. Like, go, maybe evaluations isn't your jam, but like, you can bug your legislators. There's so many mutual aid groups and organizations you can support. I mean, there's a lot of great folks doing the work. And so that's another way you can engage in advocacy. Maybe the evaluations isn't it.
Right. Be an observer, get trained in observer training, volunteer with the ACLU, join Grand Rapids Rapid Response or whatever like rapid response team you have in your area. Like, do those things. But, just again, I strongly caution against this idea. Lori, you hit the nail on the head. It's a very different type of writing. And if you are not properly trained, and I'm sorry, but a 6-hour training video that you took either, synchronously or asynchronously is not sufficient in these things, no matter what the trainer told you. It is there. You have to know the language. You have to be able to write in that language. So the Immigration Board of Appeals just issued a memo the beginning of March that instructed DHS attorneys and DHS in general and immigration judges to go through expert witnesses with a fine-tooth comb, citing a case where an individual was testifying on behalf of someone who was applying for or requesting asylum. And originally the individual was granted asylum. However, upon appeal, it was found that expert witness was an advocate, like her entire role was an advocate. And so the Board of Appeals threw out her entire testimony, and then that individual was deported. They were denied their asylum and they were deported. You are doing active harm if you are not if you don't know what you're doing. Social workers, unfortunately, we can be unintentional agents of oppression, and we really need to be mindful of that and, put our own interests, our own desires and things to the side and prioritize the needs of the vulnerable population we're trying to serve.
I think one of the things too that we have seen at the beginning of this current administration, there was a lot of immigration court judges who were terminated or let go, laid off, whatever you want to call it. And that caused even more significant backup. I believe the latest number we pulled, Holly, wasn't it like 3.7 million cases in backlog?
Yes.
Pretty close.
I want to say that's
between 3.5 and 4.
Yeah. And 4-year wait list for a lot of these hearings, and minimum.
And so it's also just want to emphasize staying in your lane and also going to a trusted person. As me, a person who didn't have exposure to these processes before, like, I have Holly read over my assessments before I submit them just to make sure I didn't miss anything, and Holly offers trainings one-on-one with people in consultation on how to write this or to read it over. How should you do it? What type of questions? Like, when we get a tough case, we have each other to brainstorm, and we recognize also that everyone doesn't have that and what a valuable resource that is. Specifically if someone has an Adam Walsh waiver, which would be maybe somebody who has a history of inappropriate sexual contact, we're talking about, what does this evaluation look like? I have experience in that population. I have experience with schizoaffective, and Holly has experience in other areas. So we always are playing off of each other. And I think that's one of the values too of making sure that we as a social work community are continuing to better each other, because we don't have to be the expert in everything, but we need to have experts to lean on.
And we will consult outside of our practice, right? It's not just Jenny and I bouncing ideas off of each other. There are incredible humans that do this work that we will reach out to and have consultation meetings with and have them go over particular cases. Jenny mentions an Adam Walsh waiver, which is essentially, a waiver if someone has a conviction for, like she mentioned, sexual contact with a minor, right? And so It is those are things that, I will 100% defer to Jenny because she has that level of expertise that I don't. And we will go outside of our practice, outside of the state of Michigan, right? That's why networking, that's why, the internet and social media, those kinds of things can be so beneficial because we have people within the social work community who have just incredible wealth of knowledge that we can tap into to do the best we can for the people that we're serving, within our scope of practice.
So essentially you're saying don't necessarily do these all by yourself in a silo without
Please
any
don't.
type of
Please.
input or get review. So just don't operate kind of as a lone wolf, which seems
No.
to make a lot of sense. Not only to help you with the report, making sure you're doing that accurately, meeting what is required, but also imagining as a protective factor for moral injury, secondary traumatic stress, right? You have somebody to talk to help remind you that, like, you got to get away from this, get out and have some, joy in your life, right? I mean, the ways that we need to take care of ourselves. So I'd imagine that would be helpful too. And some of this probably we shouldn't, I just don't, there's a lot of things in social work I don't know that we should just be doing all by ourselves. So,
yes.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned our article series that earlier. I just want to give a shout out to Sarah Camilleri. She is also an amazing social worker who's also doing this work. So she actually started this article series and reached out to us. And then we were just having such a flow of ideas. It was like, hey, let's turn this into a series. And I think we still have a couple more articles to do. But again, it's like looking for different media outlets and different formats to get this information to people.
Yeah.
Because we don't want people to feel alone. And one thing we say at our presentations too is no question is a stupid question. If you feel like you have a question that you would be judged for, please ask us. Like, you can do it after the presentation, email us, call us. Like, we are here to have those conversations because we would rather you ask than not know the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think I'm going to go back to, I don't know that a lot of us social workers understand the immigration system. I think depending on our own representations, we probably have had some level of contact, but just maybe not the awareness of that and the ways in which the system is completely set up to be difficult to navigate and get through. It's extraordinarily and keeps getting more and more, I've heard that, keeps getting more and more expensive to get out of detention centers, to file cases, to find attorneys. I mean, because of a whole lot of factors, right? I mean, attorneys being at risk of being targeted by DHS, the complexity, you have a backlog of that many cases, the nuance, the pain, the suffering you're hearing. So these systems are kind of set up to do this very thing, which is to make it hard for you to be here in the United States. I mean, we have a president who's saying very horrific, very atrocious things about folks and being very clear of who he wants to come into this country, and how he wants people to pay him in order to be in this country, right? So yeah, the system is really kind of corrupt from the top.
Yeah, there's this argument frequently that, well, the system is broken and we need to be able to fix the system. Well, one, there is a lot more political power in the problem than there is in the solution, right? And so politicians are disinclined to fix this problem because how are they going to run on fixing the immigration systems on that platform if it's not a problem? And two, I would argue that the system is not broken. I would argue that it is operating 100% as it's intended to. I think that the system is intended to maintain an easily exploitable pool of brown and black bodies in order to have cheap labor. And I think that if you take individuals who cannot speak English well and you create a system where we have perhaps like we say that it's a civil system, but we operate it very much akin to a criminal justice system, then you have people who are detained indefinitely with minimal right to due process, a minimal right to an attorney. You do not have the right to an attorney if you are going through the asylum process. If you are in deportation proceedings, you have to pay for that yourself or have someone represent you pro bono. And that includes children. Children do not have the right to an attorney in an immigration case. And if you have an undocumented unaccompanied minor, yes, there are federal programs. Michigan Immigrants' Rights Center, huge shout out to them. We love Merck. They have federal grants to represent children. However, they are federal grants. And as we have seen, federal funding can get, canceled, pulled. It's very unpredictable. And so, you have situations where you have children who have headphones on with an interpreter, where a judge is trying to ask this child who's 5, 6, 7 years old what country they would like to designate as their home country. And the child has no idea what you're saying. There are individuals like Jenny was talking about who are nonverbal, who are on the autism spectrum, who don't understand, who don't communicate well, who are in, having delusions where they're not connected with reality. These individuals are put in a system that is that is similar to a criminal justice system without the rights that they would have if they were in a criminal justice system. But it's done that way on purpose. It's not whoops, we screwed up and the system looks like this now because we weren't prepared or overwhelmed or whatever. It's like, no, this is exactly how it was intended to be.
Yeah. And also not, looking at our own criminal justice system, right, also very connected. There's the prison industrial complex. Slavery was outlawed except for in prison. So that was explicitly written in our Constitution during the passage, I believe, of the 14th Amendment that put that very language in there. And so it's absolutely set up to do, kind of the very things. And being a lawful citizen in prison, you have very, very, very few rights. And, and that can be a whole other conversation. As somebody, I've worked in the prison system, and which is its own atrocious system. Another system very much created to do exactly what it was designed to do, especially post Jim Crow. I guess I would say, I used to say post Jim Crow, but it doesn't feel like I can say that much anymore either.
That post Jim Crow doesn't really mean a whole lot right now. Like that, the bar is set so low that, it has minimal impact, I guess, saying post Jim Crow, like, okay, well, not a ton has changed. So
no.
It feels like a lot of the progress that has been made, what little baby steps have been made, are just continuing to get swept away and swept away.
And a real movement by a few to really take us back to that, right? When it was a certain group of folks were benefiting. But again, one of those conversations that could be a whole other podcast topic.
One thing, Lori, if I could mention, I want to talk just very, very briefly about the Lake and Riley Act, because I feel like that is talked about within the immigration space, but that not a lot of us understand what that does. And so I'll share, I was to Detroit because most of Michigan is covered under the Detroit Executive Office of Immigration Review. And so in Detroit, Michigan, and I was there to testify for an individual who was detained. And this individual was petitioning for VAWA, so Violence Against Women Act, which is a visa or a green card process that allows an individual who is the victim of domestic violence perpetrated by a U.S. citizen or green card holder, lawful permanent resident, that allows them to petition without the abuser knowing. So it is, on paper, a very important humanitarian immigration relief. And this individual was in a domestic violence marriage and had an incident where they were assaulted by their spouse and called the police to report the assault. And because they do not speak English and their spouse does, their spouse told the police that they themselves were assaulted. And so the individual the person who had called the police to report the abuse was themselves arrested and then charged with domestic violence and then placed in immigration detention and then placed in deportation proceedings. And I was there to testify to the legitimacy of the domestic violence and the trauma that individual had suffered. And this person had tried to get parole. So they had an infant when they were put in detention, and they have been in detention now for a year and had tried multiple times to get parole, but were denied parole each time because they had an arrest on their record for domestic violence. What the Lake and Riley Act did is, so prior to the Lake and Riley Act, you had to have a conviction in order to be automatically denied bond. But what the Lake and Riley Act did says now it's just an arrest. And the problem with that is that any of us can be arrested at any time for anything. So And because theoretically we have due process, that process playing itself out, we don't have a conviction that arrest should not be held against us, right? Because due process has allowed us to have that, we either were never charged or we were charged and found not guilty, right? Those things should not be theoretically held against us. But what the Lake and Riley Act did was said, no, if you've been arrested, then that's the strike against you, and you have to stay, you don't get paroled, or it's much, much harder to get a bond hearing, right? And so, but that Lake and Riley Act, really, we have it coming from both ends. We have the current administration who is ramping up enforcement and really, going hard and aggressive toward getting people to either quote unquote self-deport or deport them outright. And then we have things like the Lake and Riley Act that are making it easier for them to be detained in the first place and enter into the immigration system. And, talking about the idea that this is all done on purpose, I will mention that there are Great Lakes North that in Baldwin that Jenny mentioned is owned by a for-profit company. Core Civic and GEO Group are for profit. They have minimum per diems that they are paid by the federal government for, heads and beds. So the number of people that are detained, the more money they make. The longer these people are detained, the more money they make. So there are financial incentives to keeping as many people detained for as much as possible or for as long as possible. And I think that as social workers, we need to be aware of the massive, capitalistic mechanisms that are in place to not just keep people exploited, but to also make money off of that exploitation.
Yeah. And also federal prisons. I mean, many of the federal prisons, the federal prison system itself is the federal government contracts with a lot of for-profit prison companies that make tremendous money, off of having some type of detention center, prison, wherever located, kind of throughout the United States, right? In addition, it's not there's a real specific reason many prisons, at least in Michigan, are housed in the locations that they are, right? Where they are put in, up north, and we can talk about what happens down south, but up north, they're in very rural communities, and those rural communities need those prisons to be in there for a whole lot of reasons. Tax base, the benefits that come from people living there that are spending those salaries in the communities, getting taxes and other things. In order to support the communities. When I worked in Ionia, the prison I worked at was located outside of the city limits, and yet you had to pay taxes into the city because that was the, cooperative arrangement with the prison in order for them to be there. And that in Ionia, they've got 4 prisons. So most of, that's the biggest employer in that area, not just that county, but, kind of the surrounding areas. And that is done very specific reasons for places to survive, because they don't then have to look at why folks don't want to live there or how do we diversify economically. It's a kind of a trap.
Then you have just one last thought on this is that, then you have individuals who live in these rural communities who have minimal exposure to other individuals who are of a different race, who come from different countries, different walks of life, and then they're the majority or the predominant, if not the sole interactions they have of these people with people from different walks of life, different races, immigrants, what have you, are within this very specific, detention context. And that perpetuates a narrative of, immigrants are criminals and immigrants are, this particular way, or, people from this country behave this certain way, right? Because their interactions are very, structured in terms of this is really their only exposure, so to speak, to people that are different from them, because they live in these remote and rural areas that don't have a lot of diversity, right? And so that perpetuates this social narrative of immigrants are a particular way, or, this is, if they have criminal records, or they do this, or it becomes, it's a feedback loop. And it just keeps going over and over.
Yeah. Done to create that division, right? Because if we see people in a highly traumatizing environment, we see them out of context, that context becomes the reality, right, from which we see those folks. Like you said, if you see people, this is your only contact with this specific group in some type of prison detention setting, none of us are going to act like we would normally act, right? None of us are going to be functioning at high levels. None of us are going to be these, very kind, altruistic, decent human beings. We're going to operate in ways that are, because of that trauma, to survive in those really harsh conditions. And so, that division gets created and sown, and the feedback loop, right, continues where we keep that separation. It's us against them. It's this group is the problem, and we can dump all of the social ills into that group, blame them for everything. So again, I think, and that again, it's another exploitative function of capitalism. So if we have a working class, then we have a way to make money off of somebody.
And if it's us versus them, we don't look at the people who are actually in control and actually have.
Yeah, we focus our attention there, the wrong people.
And I think that's why people also need to be very mindful of the language they use, especially around immigrant communities. They are not aliens. If somebody can be underdocumented, undocumented, but just making sure that we're using humanizing language goes a long way with how it really affects your thinking and change and how your brain works.
Yeah. I always ask the question, and I'm going to wrap up soon. It's like, who benefits? When I've taught my classes, like, we really have to look at who is benefiting from this. That's where the focus needs to be, not on why folks are doing the things that they are, but who's benefiting from some of this pain and harm and exploitation, because there usually is a way to trace that back, right? And there's a person that's benefiting at the top. So as we wrap, anything else you guys want to impart on us, the audience, on what we should know as social workers about immigration, advocacy? I know, Holly, you dropped a lot of names of different organizations, but ways to get informed and then be involved.
Go ahead, Jenny. You go first.
I just want to share maybe our events that we have coming up and the direction that we're pushing in. We've actually have a really cool one with Oakland County schools and districts in their schools. Next Friday, we're doing a presentation for them. So we're really, really excited for that and to kind of merge the school and immigration lens that we have. And then we also are continuing to we're doing a series, even though this is just going to be the second one of our series of CEU presentations with NASW Michigan. So the second one, which is Immigration 101, which really delves deeply into what is the system. The other presentation that we've done many, many times now has been immigration and the role of the social work. And we call that, we just like dip a toe into the pools in that presentation, where now as we go through this series, we're going to be diving a lot deeper into each of the areas around this.
Okay. And as social workers, we need CEU. So if you're in Michigan, check that out. State.
We've also been invited to go to Pennsylvania in August for the presentation.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And we are also planning to begin rolling out CEUs on our own platform on our website, elevatedtherapeuticservices.com, both synchronous and asynchronous learning options for the content we're making.
Good. That is a good thing to know.
Yeah, I was going to mention Jenny is kind of heading up our the educational branch of our practice, and really we recognize that there's such a significant need of providing education, not just for knowledge of social workers, but also to really combat the narrative that's become really loud about immigration, immigrant communities. A lot of the myths and just flat out lies about the immigration system and how it works. And so we're really looking forward to that as, we continue to roll some of these things out with CEs, of course, because who doesn't love a good CE? And how to help, right? And that can be a good starting place. Those are the organizations that Jenny and I work with frequently.
And for people looking for something that you can do, maybe if you don't have as much time or financial resources to give to these organizations, just being a good neighbor and checking in on people in your life and saying, hey, how are you doing? If you ever have any concerns or you need help getting groceries, taking kids to school, babysitter, whatever it may be, I am here. Here's my phone number. Just being a safe person is so impactful. And I think we sometimes forget the easy step of this.
I will add being a safe white person. So being, a safe white person that is willing to use the whiteness that you have to step up and support your neighbors, because ultimately that's what we should be doing. And I'll run to the grocery store if you need some support. Here I am. If ice knocks on your door, here's my phone number. It will help connect, call family, do something kind of like that. So yeah, we need to do that. All right. Thank you. This is such a good conversation. I appreciate you guys giving me an hour of your time to talk about immigration, the role that social workers need to play, and all of the lovely, which happens every time, rabbit holes and offshoots we go down, talking about, some of the very large social and complex social, problems in our community right now. And I think really the way that they're very interconnected and not unrelated. So I will add information about your guys' practice. I will throw in the contact information to some of the organizations, including NASW Michigan, and the articles that you read. So I look forward to seeing more of them. I've read every one and look forward to the additional ones. And thank you. And I will talk to you guys again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lori.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Just a Social Worker podcast. I hope you find it helpful, supportive, and inspiring to yourself and the social work profession, because right now we could all use as much hope as we can get. If you like this work I provide, please follow me and give me a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, or Amazon Music. I am also on Instagram at Just a Social Worker Podcast, or my more professional personal page at Lori Eldred _LMSW_CAADC. And if you want to support me in a small way outside of your reviews and follows, you can check me out at buymeacoffee.com/justasocialworker. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Just a Social Worker podcast with your host, Lori Eldred. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, nor is it a form of therapy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Should you find yourself in need of support, please check out your local mental health resources, which could include your local community mental health, your local emergency room department, your local crisis mental health center, or you can call the national hotline at 988. Thank you, and thank you for listening.